At 7:11 a.m. local time on June 10, 2025, the Houthis' favorite port went up in smoke once again, but this time it was different. In an instant, the main cargo pier vanished from a fountain of concrete and steel. 2.5 seconds later, the port control building collapses into its own basement. No jets overhead, no warning, just destruction, arriving horizontally at 280 meters per second. The missiles came from the sea, skimming just a few meters above the waves. So low that Yemeni radar operators never saw them. So precise that the second warhead punched through 3 meters of concrete, found an elevator shaft, and followed it down to the underground command bunker. Within 10 seconds, the Israelis had just made Yemen's newest parking lot. But how they did it is so unlike any other attack they've done against the Houthis to date. At 6:45 a.m. local time, the INS Magan cuts through the Red Sea at 18 knots. Every second takes her 9 meters closer to her launch position. 900 seconds until weapons release. Magan is a Sa'ar 6 corvette, 90 meters of German engineering and Israeli ingenuity wrapped in angular steel. These ships cost $480 million each. And for that price, you get a vessel that packs more firepower than most destroyers into a hull the size of a large yacht. The Germans designed her to be sneaky. That angular hull isn't just for looks. It scatters radar waves in every other direction except back to the sender. Add the radar-absorbent coating, and she shows up on enemy screens about as well as a fishing boat. But for the Magan's crew, their biggest fear isn't getting spotted by enemy ships or aircraft. It's the drone swarms the Houthis have been deploying. 20, 30, sometimes 50 cheap drones coming from multiple directions. That's where the Magan's party trick comes in. See those 4 flat panels on her high superstructure? That's the ELM 2248 MF Star radar, the most advanced naval radar Israel has ever fielded. Each panel contains 450 transmit-receive modules that work together like a synchronized orchestra. While old-school rotating radars take 2 to 3 seconds per revolution, the MF Star updates its picture 30 times per second. It can track 300 targets simultaneously, more than enough to handle the largest drone swarms the Houthis can manage. But thankfully, the crew isn't too worried about them now. That's because they're throwing the Houthis completely for a loop today. Since October 2023, the Houthis have been playing defense against Israeli airstrikes. Every attack came from above. F-35s dropping GPS-guided bombs from 40,000 feet. F-15s launching standoff missiles from above. Houthi defenses are oriented accordingly. Their Soviet-era P-14 Tall King radars can scan high-altitude sectors. Their SA-6 batteries are pointed skyward at angles designed to intercept incoming aircraft. The Houthis basically have their chin up while the Israelis are coming in with a savage uppercut. At 7 a.m., target data flows across the Combat Information Center screens. The Magan is exactly where she needs to be, 300 kilometers from Houdeida port, well outside the range of any Houthi coastal defense missiles. Through secure satellite links, she's receiving real-time intelligence from Israeli reconnaissance assets. Thermal imaging shows the port in exquisite detail. Every heat source glows on the infrared display. Generators, vehicles, and one particularly interesting underground facility that's way too warm to be storing frozen fish. At 7:03 a.m., the crew finally gets the order they've all been waiting for: fire. Time to remind the Houthis why they shouldn't touch Israeli boats either. At 7:04 a.m., the first missile shoots out. The Gabriel 5 rides a column of flame straight up, accelerating at 15 Gs. The solid rocket booster burns for exactly 3.4 seconds, taking the missile from 0 to Mach 2.1 before separating. A small turbojet engine hidden in the missile's belly takes over, throttling back to subsonic cruise speed to conserve fuel. 1.8 seconds later, Cell 16 follows suit. The spacing prevents the first missile's exhaust from cooking the second one. Fratricide is embarrassing when you do it to yourself. By 7:05 a.m., both missiles have completed their initial climb and are nosing over toward the horizon. This is where things get interesting. Instead of climbing to altitude like a typical cruise missile, the Gabriel drops down to 3 meters above sea level. At that height, they're literally flying below the radar horizon for any ground-based system more than 40 kilometers away. The missiles also don't take the direct route. That's 278 kilometers of open water where any fishing boat with a radio could report them. Instead, they follow a pre-programmed path that confuses the enemy. The first waypoint, thread between 2 cargo ships 80 kilometers out. Second, use Camaran Island as a radar shield. Third, exploit the gap in coverage where Houthi radars from 2 different sites can't quite overlap. Each waypoint adds distance, but buys in visibility. The onboard navigation system uses 3 different methods to stay on course. GPS provides the primary guidance, but the Israelis assume it might be jammed near the target. Additionally, there's an inertial navigation system that utilizes tiny gyroscopes to track every movement. And finally, terrain matching. The missile's radar altimeter constantly compares ground features to stored maps, ensuring it knows exactly where it is. The Houthis aren't completely helpless, though. They've gotten a decent air defense network along the coast, a mix of Soviet hand-me-downs and newer Iranian systems. The problem is doctrine. Every system is configured to counter the threat they've been facing for 2 years: aircraft at medium to high altitudes. Their search patterns start at 1,000 meters and go up from there. Below that, they assume the terrain provides protection. Bad assumption when your enemy specializes in terrain-hugging flight profiles. At 7:09 a.m., the missiles reach the final approach point, 22 kilometers from target. The turbojets spool up to maximum thrust. This is the dangerous part. They're close enough now that even a half-asleep radar operator might notice something screaming toward them at 280 meters per second. The infrared sensors in the nose cones activate, seeing the world in heat rather than light. Through the morning haze, Houthi Port appears as a constellation of thermal signatures. The navigation computers don't just look for the port, they look for specific features. That L-shaped pier with its distinctive heat pattern from yesterday's sun. That control building with the suspiciously warm basement. The AI-driven pattern recognition can differentiate between a real target and a decoy in milliseconds. At 7:10 a.m., 10 kilometers from impact, the active radar seekers warm up. These aren't the massive radar dishes of old. They're compact, electronically scanned arrays operating in K-band. The narrow beam width allows them to paint a target with surgical precision while minimizing the chance of detection. Both missiles simultaneously go active, their seekers locking on to their assigned targets. The Houthis now have exactly 41 seconds to react. The port's defenses are, to put it charitably, inadequate. 2 ZSU anti-aircraft guns man the perimeter, Soviet-designed weapons that were cutting edge when the Beatles were still together. The gun crews need 6 seconds minimum to slew onto a target, assuming they're at their posts and not drinking tea. One sailor mans a Strela 2 shoulder-fired missile, a heat seeker that might have threatened a helicopter in 1968. But against sea-skimming missiles going Mach Jesus, they'd have better luck with slingshots. At 7:11 a.m., 5 seconds from impact, the missiles make their final corrections. The first missile adjusts 2 degrees right to hit the pier's main support structure. The second one noses down 5 degrees towards the command bunker. As the missiles come in for their final phase of flight, the Houthi guards hear the missiles, but there's nothing they can do besides run for their lives. At 7:11 a.m., the first missile doesn't just hit the pier, it hits exactly where the structure can least afford it. The Israeli engineers had studied the port layout for months, identifying the critical load-bearing points. The 200-kilogram warhead detonates at the junction where the main pier meets its primary support column. The explosion creates a pressure wave traveling at 6,900 meters per second through the concrete. That's 20 times the speed of sound in air. The concrete doesn't have time to crack, it simply turns to powder in an expanding sphere. The rebar inside, designed to hold concrete together, becomes hypersonic shrapnel. Within 50 milliseconds, a 60-meter section of the pier is now the port's newest seafloor. The second missile hits 2 seconds later. The missile punches through floor after floor of the command building as it gets closer to its target. The onboard accelerometer counts the distance: 3 meters, 5 meters, 8 meters, at a depth of 10 meters, exactly where the intelligence indicated the command bunker would be. The delay fuse triggers. In open air, 200 kilograms of RDX-based explosive creates a lethal radius of about 150 meters. In a confined underground space, physics gets creative. The initial blast wave travels outward at 8,000 meters per second, but it has nowhere to go. It hits the reinforced walls and reflects back, creating a complex pattern of overpressure waves. Where these waves intersect, pressures spike to over 500 psi. At that pressure, reinforced concrete flows like water, steel I-beams fold like paper. Above ground, the port control building discovers its basement has suddenly expanded by a factor of 4. Without foundation support, 4 stories of concrete and steel accelerate downward at 9.8 meters per second. The building doesn't collapse, it implodes, rushing to fill the void where the basement once was. Secondary explosions ripple through the facility as fuel lines rupture and electrical systems arc. A backup generator, faithfully trying to restore power, instead contributes 400 liters of diesel fuel to the growing inferno. By 7:11 and 30 seconds a.m., the Houthi port has been fundamentally reorganized. The main pier exists in name only. The port control facility is a smoking crater. The underground command center is now just a deep hole. But this isn't the Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul prize match. The Houthis still have a lot of fight left in them. And this time, it will be the Israelis who get caught off guard. At 7:51 p.m., at a launch site 30 kilometers inland from Sana'a, a massive truck-mounted launcher raises its cargo toward the stars. The Birkin 3 ballistic missile, all 12 meters and 7,000 kilograms of it, points at Israel with one goal in mind. The Birkin 3 is what happens when you take a Soviet Scud missile, feed it Iranian steroids, and teach it new tricks. The original Scud-C could barely reach 600 kilometers. This modified monster can touch 1,200 kilometers, putting all of Israel in range from Yemen. The Iranians didn't just extend the fuel tanks, they redesigned the entire propulsion system, upgraded the guidance package, and topped it with a 250-kilogram warhead that can level a city block. The launch crew knows they're racing against time. American satellites are watching, Israeli intelligence is monitoring, and every second the missile sits vertically is another second for someone to put a cruise missile through their windshield. With targeting data from Iran secured, at 7:52 p.m., they hit the launch button. Unlike liquid-fueled missiles that build thrust gradually, solid motors go from 0 to everything right now. The Birkin accelerates off the launcher at 5 Gs, crushing its inertial components against their mountings. In 4 seconds, it's supersonic. The ground crew doesn't wait to watch. They're already racing to get their launcher underground before the inevitable counterstrike. 5,000 kilometers away, orbiting high above the Earth, an American Defense Support Program satellite detects the launch. These Cold War veterans were designed to spot Soviet ICBMs, but they work just fine on tactical ballistic missiles. The satellite's infrared telescope sees the Birkin's exhaust plume like a flashlight in a dark room. Within 0.7 seconds, it's transmitting a warning. The data bounces through the secure channels at light speed. Pentagon to Tel Aviv, Tel Aviv to the Kira Defense Complex, Kira to every Arrow battery in Israel. Total elapsed time, 2.1 seconds. 4 seconds after launch, the Israeli Defense Forces radar has already acquired the target. The Green Pine radar is arguably one of the best air defense radars in the world. Each radar array stands 9 meters tall and weighs 60 tons, about the same as an M1 Abrams tank. But weight isn't what makes Green Pine special, it's the raw power. This beast pumps out 2 megawatts of radar energy, enough to track a baseball at 500 kilometers or a ballistic missile at 800 kilometers. The radar doesn't just scan mechanically like older systems. Instead, it uses electronic beam steering to search vast volumes of sky in milliseconds. 2,000 transmit-receive modules work in perfect synchronization, creating beams that can track 30 targets while guiding 12 interceptors simultaneously. The L-band frequency gives it the perfect balance, long enough wavelength to see through weather and chaff, short enough for precision tracking. As the Birkin climbs through 20 kilometers of altitude, Green Pine has already calculated its entire trajectory. Apogee, 185 kilometers. Impact point, Greater Tel Aviv area. Time to impact, 7 minutes, 23 seconds. The battle management system automatically assigns the threat to the best position Arrow battery. The Arrow 3 system represents the third generation of Israelis' ballistic missile defense, and it's a complete departure from its predecessors. Arrow 1 and 2 were designed to intercept missiles in the upper atmosphere. Arrow 3 says, forget the atmosphere, and takes out threats in space. At 8:03 p.m., exactly as the Birkin reaches 42 kilometers altitude, an Arrow 3 interceptor roars off its launcher at Ramon Air Base. The two-stage missile accelerates even harder than its target, 8 Gs, crushing it against the launcher before it clears the rail. The first stage, a massive solid rocket motor, burns for 40 seconds, taking the interceptor through the atmosphere at speeds that turn air into plasma. The missile glows white-hot, protected by a special coating that sacrifices itself to keep the electronics cool. At an altitude of 60 meters, the first stage burns out and separates. The second stage ignites immediately, pushing the intercept vehicle higher and faster. By the time it reaches 80 kilometers, officially in space, it's traveling at 2,800 meters per second. That's Mach 8.2, or New York to Los Angeles in 20 minutes. But speed isn't the Arrow 3's secret weapon. It's the intercept vehicle itself. Once the second stage falls away, what remains is 150 kilometers of the most sophisticated technology Israel produces. At these speeds, kinetic energy is more devastating than any warhead. Instead, it carries sensors, computers, and divert thrusters that can make adjustments measured in centimeters while traveling at interplanetary velocities. The infrared seeker opens its eyes and starts hunting. Space is big and dark, but the Birkin's body still radiates heat from its boost phase. Against the